Day 10, the 8th story of the Decameron, Part B. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. RIGG. Day 10, the 8th story, Part B. But for that discourse of the secret providence and purposes of the gods seems to many a matter hard and scarce to be understood, I am willing to assume that they meddle in no wise with our concerns, and to descend to the region of human counsels, in speaking whereof I must needs do two things quite at variance with my wont, to wit, in some degree praise myself and censure or vilify another. But as in either case I mean not to deviate from the truth, and 'tis what the occasion demands, I shall not fail to do so. With bitter upbraidings, animated rather by rage than by reason, you cease not to murmur, nay to cry out, against Gesippus, and to harass him with your abuse, and hold him condemned, for that her, whom you saw fit to give him, he has seen fit to give me, to wife, wherein I deem him worthy of the highest commendation, and that for two reasons. First, because he has done the office of a friend, and secondly, because he has done more wisely than you did. After what sort the sacred laws of friendship prescribe that friend shall entreat friend, 'tis not my present purpose to declare. 'Twill suffice to remind you that the tie of friendship should be more binding than that of blood or kinship, seeing that our friends are of our own choosing, whereas our kinsfolk are appointed us by fortune. Wherefore, if my life was more to Gesippus than your good will, since I am as I hold myself his friend, can any wonder thereat? But pass we to my second reason, in the exposition whereof I must needs with yet more cogency prove you that he has been wiser than you, seeing that methinks you wot not of the providence of the gods, and still less of the consequences of friendship. I say then, that as 'twas your premeditated and deliberate choice that gave Sophronia to this young philosopher Gesippus, so 'twas his that gave her to another young philosopher. 'Twas your counsel that gave her to an Athenian, 'twas his that gave her to a Roman. 'Twas your counsel that gave her to a man of gentle birth, 'twas his that gave her to one of birth yet gentler. Wealthy was he to whom your counsel gave her, most wealthy he to whom his counsel gave her. Not only did he to whom your counsel gave her love her not, but he scarce knew her, whereas 'twas the one that loved her beyond all other blessings, nay, more dearly than his own life, that his counsel gave her. And to the end that it may appear more plainly that 'tis even as I say, and Gesippus' counsel more to be commended than yours, let us examine it point by point, that I, like Gesippus, am young and a philosopher, my countenance and my pursuits may, without making more words about the matter, sufficiently attest. We are also of the same age, and have ever kept pace together in our studies. Now true it is that he is an Athenian, and I am a Roman. But as touching the comparative glory of the cities, should the matter be mooted, I say that I am of a free city, and he of a city tributary, that I am of a city that is mistress of all the world, and he of one that is subject to mine, that I am of a city that flourishes mightily in arms, in empire, and in art, whereas he cannot boast his city as famous, save in arts. Moreover, albeit you see me here in the guise of a most humble scholar, I am not born of the dregs of the populace of Rome. My halls and the public places of Rome are full of the antique effigies of my forefathers, and the annals of Rome abound with the records of triumphs led by the Quintii to the Roman Capitol, and so far from age having withered it, today yet more abundantly than ever of yore flourishes the glory of our name. Of my wealth I forbear, for shame, to speak, being mindful that honest poverty is time-honored, and the richest inheritance of the noble citizens of Rome. But, allowing for the nonce the opinion of the vulgar, which holds poverty in disrepute, and highly appraises wealth, I, albeit I never sought it, yet, as the favoured of fortune, have abundant store thereof. Now well I wot that Gesippus, being of your own city, you justly prized and prize an alliance with him. But not a whit less should you prize an alliance with me at Rome, considering that there you will have in me an excellent host, and a patron apt, zealous, and potent, to serve you as well in matters of public interest as in your private concerns. Who then, dismissing all bias from his mind, and judging with impartial reason, would deem your counsel more commendable than that of Gesippus? Assuredly none. Sophronia, then, being married to Titus Quintius Fulvus, a citizen of Rome, of an ancient and illustrious house, and wealthy, and a friend of Gesippus, whoso takes umbrage of offence thereat, does that which it behoves him not to do, and knows not what he does. Perchance some will say that their complaint is not that Sophronia is the wife of Titus, but that she became his wife after such a sort, to wit, privily, by theft, neither friend nor any of her kin witting aught thereof. But herein is no matter of marvel, no prodigy as yet unheard of. I need not instance those who before now have taken to them husbands in defiance of their father's will, or have eloped with their lovers, and been their mistresses before they were their wives, or of whose marriages no word has been spoken, until their pregnancy or parturition published them to the world, and necessity sanctioned the fact. Naught of this has happened in the case of Sophronia. On the contrary, 'twas in proper form, and in meet and seemly sort, that Gesippus gave her to Titus, and others peradventure will say that 'twas by one to whom such office belonged not that she was bestowed in marriage. Nay, but this is but vain and womanish querulousness, and comes of scant consideration. Know we not, then, that fortune varies according to circumstances, her methods, and her means of disposing events to their predetermined ends? What matter it is to me, if it be a cobbler rather than a philosopher, that fortune has ordained to compass something for me, whether privily or overtly, so only the result is as it should be. I ought, indeed, to take order, if the cobbler be indiscreet, that he meddle no more in affairs of mine, but at the same time I ought to thank him for what he has done. If Gesippus has duly bestowed Sophronia in marriage, it is gratuitous folly to find fault with the manner and the person. If you mistrust his judgment, have a care that it be not in his power to do the like again, but thank him for this turn. Natheless, you are to know that I used no cunning practice or deceit to sully in any degree the fair fame of your house in the person of Sophronia, and, albeit I took her privily to wife, I came not as a ravisher to despoil her of her virginity, nor in any hostile sort was I minded to make her mine on dishonourable terms, and spurn your alliance, but, being fervently enamoured of her bewitching beauty and her noble qualities, I wist well that, should I make suit for her with those formalities with you, perchance, will say were due, then, for the great love you bear her, and for fear lest I should take her away with me to Rome, I might not hope to have her. Accordingly, I made use of the secret practice which is now manifest to you, and brought Gesippus to consent in my interest to that whereto he was averse, and thereafter, ardently though I loved her, I sought not to commingle with her as a lover, but as a husband, nor closed with her, until, as she herself by her true witness may assure you, I had but apt words, and with the ring made her my lawful wife, asking her if she would have me to husband, whereto she answered yes, wherein, if she seems to have been tricked, 'tis not I that am to blame, but she, for that she asked me not who I was. This, then, is the great wrong, sin, crime, whereof for love and friendship's sake Gizippus and I are guilty, that Sophronia is privily become the wife of Titus Quintius. 'Tis for this that you harass him with your menaces and hostile machinations. What more would you do, had he given her to a villain, to a caitiff, to a slave? Where would you find fetters, dungeons, crosses adequate to your vengeance? But enough of this at present. An event, which I did not expect, has now happened. My father is dead, and I must needs return to Rome, wherefore, being fain to take Sophronia with me, I have discovered to you that which otherwise I had, perchance, still kept close. Whereto, if you are wise, you will gladly reconcile yourselves, for that, if I had been minded to play you false, or put an affront upon you, I might have scornfully abandoned her to you. But God forefend that such baseness be ever harboured in a Roman breast. Sophronia, then, by the will of the gods, by force of law, and by my own love-taught astuteness, is mine. The which it would seem that you, deeming yourselves, peradventure, wiser than the gods, or the rest of mankind, do foolishly set at naught, and that in two ways alike most offensive to me, inasmuch as you both withhold from me Sophronia, in whom right, as against me, you have none, and also entreat as your enemy Gizippus, to whom you are rightfully bounden. The folly whereof I purpose not at present fully to expound to you, but in friendly sort to counsel you to abate your wrath and abandon all your schemes of vengeance, and restore Sophronia to me, that I may part from you on terms of amity and alliance, and so abide. But of this rest assured, that whether this, which is done, like you or not, if you are minded to contravene it, I shall take Gizippus hence with me, and once arrived in Rome, shall, in your despite, find means to recover her who is lawfully mine, and pursuing you with unremitting enmity, will apprise you by experience of the full measure and effect of a Roman's wrath. Having so said, Titus started to his feet, his countenance distorted by anger, and took Gizippus by the hand, and with manifest contempt for all the rest, shaking his head at them and threatening them, led him out of the temple. They that remained in the temple, being partly persuaded by his arguments to accept his alliance and friendship, partly terrified by his last words, resolved by common consent that 'twas better to have the alliance with Titus, as they had lost that of Gizippus, than to add to that loss the enmity of Titus. Wherefore they followed Titus, and having come up with him, told him that they were well pleased that Sophronia should be his, and that they should prize his alliance and the friendship of dear Gizippus, and having ratified this treaty of amity and alliance with mutual cheer, they departed and sent Sophronia to Titus. Sophronia, discreetly making a virtue of necessity, transferred forthwith to Titus the love she had borne Gizippus, and being come with Titus to Rome, was there received with no small honour. Gizippus tarried in Athens, held in little account by well nigh all the citizens, and being involved in certain of their broils, was, not long afterwards, with all his household, banished the city, poor, nay destitute, and condemned to perpetual exile. Thus hard bested, and at length reduced to mendiancy, he made his way, so as least discomfortably he might, to Rome, being minded to see whether Titus would remember him, and there, learning that Titus lived, and was much affected by all the Romans, and having found out his house, he took his stand in front of it, and watched until Titus came by, to whom, for shame of the sorry trim that he was in, he ventured no word, but did his endeavour that he might be seen of him, hoping that Titus might recognize him, and call him by his name. But Titus passing on, Gizippus deemed that he had seen and avoided him, and calling to mind that which aforetime he had done for him, went away wroth and desperate. And fasting and penniless, and for 'twas now night, knowing not whither he went, and yearning above all for death, he wandered by chance to a spot which, albeit 'twas within the city, had much the aspect of a wilderness, and espying a spacious grotto, he took shelter in there for the night, and worn out at last with grief, on the bare ground, wretchedly clad as he was, he fell asleep. Now 2 men that had that night gone out a thieving, having committed the theft, came towards morning to the grotto, and there quarrelled, and the stronger slew the other, and took himself off. Aroused by the noise, Giuseppus witnessed the murder, and deeming that he had now the means of compassing without suicide the death for which he so much longed, budged not a jot, but stayed there, until the serjeants of the court, which had already got wind of the affair, came on the scene, and laid violent hands upon him, and led him away. Being examined, he confessed that he had slain the man, and had then been unable to make his escape from the grotto. Wherefore the praetor, Marcus Varro by name, sentenced him to death by crucifixion, as was then the custom. But Titus, who happened at that moment to come into the praetorium, being told the crime for which he was condemned, and scanning the poor wretch's face, presently recognized him for Giuseppus, and marvelled how he should come to be there, and in such a woeful plight, and most ardently desiring to succour him, not seeing other way to save his life except to exonerate him by accusing himself, he straightway stepped forward, and said with a loud voice, "Marcus Varro, call back the poor man on whom thou hast passed sentence, for he is innocent. 'Tis enough that I have incurred the wrath of the gods by one deed of violence, to wit, the murder of whom your serjeants found dead this morning, without aggravating my offence by the death of another innocent man." Perplexed and vexed that he should have been heard by all in the praetorium, but unable honourably to avoid compliance with that which laws enjoined, Varro had Giuseppus brought back, and, in presence of Titus, said to him, "How camest thou to be so mad as, though no constraint was put upon thee, to confess a deed thou never didst, thy life being at stake? Thou saidst that 'twas thou by whom the man was slain last night, and now comes this other, and says that 'twas not thou, but he that slew him." Giuseppus looked, and seeing Titus, wist well that, being grateful for the service rendered by him in the past, Titus was now minded to save his life at the cost of his own. Wherefore, affected to tears, he said, "Nay, but, Varro, in very sooth I slew him, and 'tis now too late, this tender solicitude of Titus for my deliverance." But on his part, "Praetor," quoth Titus, "thou seest this man is a stranger, and was found unarmed beside the murdered man. Thou canst not doubt that he was fain of death for very wretchedness. Wherefore discharge him, and let punishment light on me, who have merited it." Marvelling at the importunity of both, Varro readily surmised that neither was guilty, and while he was casting about how he might acquit them, lo, in came a young man, one Publius Ambustus, a desperate character, and known to all the Romans for an arrant thief. He it was that had verily committed the murder, and witting both the men to be innocent of that of which each accused himself, so sore at heart was he by reason of their innocence, that, overborne by an exceeding great compassion, he presented himself before Varro, and, "Praetor," quoth he, "'tis destiny draws me hither to loose the knot of these men's contention, and some god within me leaves me no peace of his whips and stings, until I discover my offence. Wherefore know that neither of these men is guilty of that which each accuses himself. 'Tis verily I that slew the man this morning, about daybreak, and before I slew him, while I was sharing our plunder with him, I espied this poor fellow asleep there. Naught need I say to clear Titus. The general bruit of his illustrious renown attests that he is not a man of such a sort. Discharge him, therefore, and extract from me the penalty prescribed by the laws." The affair had by this time come to the ears of Octavianus, who caused all three to be brought before him, and demanded to know the causes by which they had been severally moved to accuse themselves, and, each having told his story, Octavianus released the two by reason of their innocence, and the third for love of them. Titus took Gesippus home, having first chidden him not a little for his faint-heartedness and diffidence, and there, Sophronia receiving him as a brother, did him marvellous cheer, and having comforted him a while, and arrayed him in apparel befitting his worth and birth, he first shared with him all his substance, and then gave him his sister, a young damsel named Fulvia, to wife, and said to him, Choose now, Gesippus, whether thou wilt tarry here with me, or go back to Achaia with all that I have given thee. Partly perforce of his banishment from his city, partly for that the sweet friendship of Titus was justly dear to him, Gesippus consented to become a Roman. And so long and happily they lived together at Rome, Gesippus with his Fulvia, and Titus with his Sophronia, in the same house, growing, if possible, greater friends day by day. Exceeding sacred then is friendship, and worthy not only to be had in veneration, but to be extolled with never-ending praise, as the most dutiful mother of magnificence and seemliness, sister of gratitude and charity, and foe to enmity and avarice, ever, without waiting to be asked, ready to do as generously by another as she would be done by herself. Rarely indeed is it to-day that twain are found, in whom her most holy fruits are manifest, for which is most shamefully answerable the covetousness of mankind, which, regarding only private interest, has banished friendship beyond earth's farthest bourne, there to abide in perpetual exile. How should love, or wealth, or kinship, how should aught but friendship have so quickened the soul of Gesippus, that the tears and sighs of Titus should incline his heart to see to him the fair and gracious lady that was his betrothed and his beloved? Laws, menaces, terror, how should these, how should aught but friendship have withheld Gesippus, in lonely places, in hidden retreats, in his own bed, from enfolding, not perchance unsolicited by her, the fair damsel within his youthful embrace? Honours, rewards, gains, would Gesippus for these, would he, for aught but friendship, have made nothing of the loss of kindred, his own and Sophronia's, have made nothing of the injurious murmurs of the populace, have made nothing of mocks and scorns, so only he might content his friend? And on the other hand, for what other cause than friendship had Titus, when he might decently have feigned not to see, have striven with the utmost zeal to compass his own death, and set himself upon the cross in Gesippus' stead? Chi avrebbe Tito senza alcuna dilazione fatto liberalissimo a comunicare il suo ampissimo patrimonio con Gisippo, al quale la fortuna il suo aveva tolto, se non costei? And what but friendship had left no place for suspicion in the soul of Titus, and filled it with a most fervent desire to give his sister to Gesippus, albeit he saw him to be reduced to extreme penury and destitution? But so it is that men covet hosts of acquaintance, troops of kinsfolk, offsprings in plenty, and the number of their dependents increases with their wealth, and they reflect not that there is none of these, be he who he may, but will be more apprehensive of the least peril threatening himself than cumbered to avert a great peril from his lord or kinsman, whereas between friends we know 'tis quite contrariwise. End of Day 10, the 8th story. Read by J.C. Guan, January 2009.
Day 10, the 9th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. RIGG. Day 10, the ninth story. Saladin, in guise of a merchant, is honorably entreated by Messer Torello. The crusade ensuing, Messer Torello appoints a date after which his wife may marry again. He is taken prisoner, and by training hawks, comes under the Soldan's notice. The Soldan recognizes him, makes himself known to him, and entreats him with all honor. Messer Torello falls sick, and by magic arts is transported in a single night to Pavia, where his wife's second marriage is then to be solemnized, and being present thereat, is recognized by her, and returns with her to his house.
So ended Philomela her story, and when all alike had commended the magnificence shown by Titus in his gratitude, the king, reserving the last place for Dioneo, thus began.
Lovesome, my ladies, true beyond all question, is what Philomela reports of friendship, and with justice did she deplore in her closing words the little account in which 'tis held to-day among mortals. And were we here for the purpose of correcting, or even of censuring, the vices of the age, I should add a copious sequel to her discourse. But as we have another end in view, it has occurred to me to set before you in a narrative, which will be of considerable length, but entertaining throughout, an instance of Saladin's magnificence, to the end that, albeit by reason of our vices, it may not be possible for us to gain to the full the friendship of any, yet by the matters whereof you shall hear in my story, we may at least be incited to take delight in doing good offices, in the hope that sooner or later we may come by our reward thereof. I say, then, that in the time of the Emperor Frederick I, as certain writers affirm, the Christians made common emprise for the recovery of the Holy Land, whereof that most valiant prince, Saladin, then Soldan of Babylonia, being in good time apprised, resolved to see for himself the preparations made by the Christian potentates for the said emprise, that he might put himself in better trim to meet them. So, having ordered all things to his mind in Egypt, he made as if he were bound on a pilgrimage, and attended only by 2 of his chiefest and sagest lords, and 3 servants, took the road in the guise of a merchant. And having surveyed many provinces of Christendom, as they rode through Lombardy with intent to cross the Alps, they chanced, between Milan and Pavia, to fall in with a gentleman, one Messer Torello d'Istria de Pavia, who, with his servants, and his dogs and falcons, was betaking him to a fine estate that he had on the Ticino, there to tarry a while. Now Messer Torello no sooner espied Saladin and his lords than he guessed them to be gentlemen and foreigners, and being zealous to do them honour, when Saladin asked one of his servants how far off Pavia might still be, and if he might win there in time to enter the town, he suffered not the servant to make answer, but, "No, gentleman," quoth he, "by the time you reach Pavia 'twill be too late for you to enter." "So," replied Saladin, "then might you be pleased to direct us, as we are strangers, where we may best be lodged?" "That gladly will I," returned Messer Torello. "I was but thinking to send one of these my men on an errand to Pavia. I will send him with you, and he will guide you to a place where you will find very comfortable quarters." Then, turning to one of his most trusted servants, he gave him his instructions and dispatched him with them. After which he repaired to his estate, and forthwith, as best he might, caused a goodly supper to be made ready, and the table set in his garden. Which done, he stationed himself at the gate on the lookout for his guests. The servant, conversing with the gentlemen of divers matters, brought them by devious roads to his lord's estate, without their being ware of it. Whom as soon as Messer Torello espied, he came forth afoot to meet them, and said with a smile, "A hearty welcome to you, gentlemen." Now Saladin, being very quick of apprehension, perceived that the knight had doubted when he met them that, were he to bid them to his house, they might not accept his hospitality, and accordingly, that it might not be in their power to decline it, had brought them to his house by a ruse. And so, returning his greeting, "Sir," quoth he, "were it meet to find fault with those that show courtesy, we should have a grievance against you, for that, to say naught of somewhat delaying our journey, you have in guerdon of a single greeting constrained us to accept so noble a courtesy as yours." Whereto the knight, who was of good understanding and well spoken, made answer, "Gentlemen, such courtesy as we show you will, in comparison of that which, by what I gather from your aspect, were meet for you, prove but a sorry thing. But in sooth this side of Pavia you might not anywhere have been well lodged. Wherefore take it not amiss that you have come somewhat out of your way to find less discomfortable quarters." And as he spoke, about them flocked the servants, who, having helped them to dismount, saw to their horses. Whereupon Messer Torello conducted them to the chambers that were made ready for them, where, having caused them to be relieved of their boots and refreshed with the coolest of wines, he held pleasant converse with them until supper time. Saladin and his lords and servants all knew Latin, so that they both understood, and made themselves understood, very well, and there was none of them but adjudged this knight to be the most agreeable and debonair man, and therewithal the best talker, that he had ever seen. While to Messer Torello, on the other hand, they showed as far greater magnificos than he had at first supposed, whereby he was inly vexed that he had not been able that evening to do them the honours of company, and a more ceremonious banquet. For which default he resolved to make amends on the ensuing morning. Wherefore, having imparted to one of his servants that which he would have done, he sent him to his most judicious and high-minded lady at Pavia, which was close by, and where never a gate was locked. Which done, he brought the gentlemen into the garden, and courteously asked them who they were. "We are Cypriot merchants," replied Saladin, "and 'tis from Cyprus we come, and we are on our way to Paris on business." Quoth then Messer Torello, "Would to God that our country-bred gentlemen of such quality as are the merchants that I see Cyprus breeds." From which they passed to discourse of other matters, until supper time being come, he besought them to seat them at table. Whereat, considering that the supper was but improvised, their entertainment was excellent and well ordered. The tables being cleared, Messer Torello, surmising that they must be weary, kept them no long time from their rest, but bestowed them in most comfortable beds, and soon after went to rest himself. Meanwhile the servant that he had sent to Pavia did his lord's errand to the lady, who, in the style rather of a queen than of a housewife, forthwith assembled not a few of Messer Torello's friends and vassals, and caused all meet preparation to be made for a magnificent banquet, and by messengers bearing torches bade not a few of the noblest of the citizens thereto, and had store of silken and other fabrics, and vair brought in, and all set in order in every point, as her husband had directed. Day came, and the gentleman being risen, Messer Torello got him to horse with them, and having sent for his hawks, brought them to a ford, and showed them how the hawks flew. By and by, Saladin requesting of him a guide to the best inn at Pavia. "I myself will be your guide," returned Messer Torello, "for I have occasion to go thither." Which offer they, nothing doubting, did gladly accept, and so with him they set forth. And about tierce, being come to the city, and expecting to be directed to the best inn, they were brought by Messer Torello to his own house, where they were forthwith surrounded by full 50 of the greatest folk of the city, gathered there to give the gentleman a welcome. And 'twas who should hold a bridle or a stirrup while they dismounted. Whereby Saladin and his lords, more than guessing the truth, "Messer Torello," quoth they, "'twas not this that we craved of you. Honour enough had we from you last night, and far in excess of our desires, wherefore thou mightest very well have left us to go our own road." Whereto, "Gentlemen," replied Messer Torello, "for that which was done yestereve I have to thank fortune rather than you. seeing that fortune surprised you on the road at an hour when you must needs repair to my little house. For that which shall be done this morning, I shall be beholden to you, as will also these gentlemen that surround you, with whom, if you deem it courteous to do so, you may refuse to breakfast, if you like." Fairly conquered, Saladin and his lords dismounted, and heartily welcomed by the gentlemen, were conducted to the chambers which had been most sumptuously adorned for their use, and having laid aside their riding dress, and taken some refreshment, repaired to the saloon, where all had been made ready with splendour. There, having washed their hands, they sat them down to table, and were regaled with a magnificent repast of many courses, served with all stately and fair ceremony, insomuch that, had the emperor himself been there, 'twould not have been possible to do him more honour. And albeit Saladin and his lords were grandees, and used to exceeding great displays of pomp and state, nevertheless this showed to them as not a little marvellous, and one of the greatest they had ever seen, having regard to the quality of their host, whom they knew to be but a citizen, and no lord. Breakfast done, and the tables cleared, they conversed a while of high matters, and then, as 'twas very hot, all the gentlemen of Pavia, so it pleased Messer Torello, retired for their siesta, while he remained with his 3 guests, with whom he presently withdrew into a chamber, whither, that there might be naught that he held dear which they had not seen, he called his noble lady. And so the dame, exceeding fair and stately of person, and arrayed in rich apparel, with her 2 little boys, that showed as 2 angels, on either hand, presented herself before them, and graciously greeted them. Whereupon they rose, and returned her salutation with reverence, and caused her to sit down among them, and made much of her 2 little boys. But after some interchange of gracious discourse, Messer Torello being withdrawn somewhat apart, she asked them courteously whence they came, and whither they were bound, and had of them the same answer that Messer Torello had received. "So," quoth the lady with a joyful air, "then I see that my woman's wit will be of service to you, wherefore I pray you as a special favour neither to reject nor to despise the little gift that I am about to present to you, but reflecting that, as women have but small minds, so they make but small gifts, accept it, having regard rather to the good will of the giver than the magnitude of the gift." She then caused bring forth for each of them 2 pair of robes, lined the one with silk, the other with vair, no such robes as citizens or merchants, but such as lords used to wear, and 3 vests of taffeta, besides linen clothes, and "Take them," quoth she, "the robes I give you are even such as I have arrayed my lord withal. The other things, considering that you are far from your wives, and have come a long way, and have yet a long way to go, and that merchants love to be neat and trim, may, albeit they are of no great value, be yet acceptable to you." Wondering, the gentlemen acknowledged without reserve that there was no point of courtesy wherein Messer Torello was not minded to acquit himself towards them. And noting the lordly fashion of the robes, unsuited to the quality of merchants, they misdoubted that Messer Torello had recognized them. However, quoth one of them to the lady, "Gifts great indeed are these, madam, nor such as lightly to accept, were it not that thereto we are constrained by your prayers, to which we may on no account say no." Whereupon, Messer Torello being now come back, the lady bid them adieu, and took her leave of them, and in like manner did she cause their servants to be supplied with equipment suitable to them. The gentleman, being much importuned thereto by Messer Torello, consented to tarry the rest of the day with him, and so, having slept, they donned their robes, and rode a while with him about the city, and supper time being come, they feasted magnificently, and with a numerous and honourable company. And so, in due time, they betook them to rest, and at daybreak, being risen, they found, in lieu of their jaded nags, 3 stout and excellent palfreys, and in like manner fresh and goodly mounts for their servants. Which Saladin marking, turned to his lords, and, "By God," quoth he, "never was gentleman more complete and courteous and considerate than this Messer Torello, and if the Christian kings are as kingly as he is knightly, there is none of them whose onset the Soldan of Babylon might well abide, to say naught of so many as we see making ready to fall upon him." However, knowing that 'twas not permissible to refuse, he very courteously thanked Messer Torello, and so they got them to horse. Messer Torello, with a numerous company, escorted them far beyond the gate of the city, until, loath though Saladin was to part from him, so greatly did he now affect him, yet as he must needs speed on, he besought him to turn back. Whereupon, albeit it irked him to take leave of them, "Gentlemen," quoth Messer Torello, "since such is your pleasure, I obey. But this I must say to you, who you are I know not, nor would I know more than you are pleased to impart. But whoever you may be, you will not make me believe that you are merchants this while, and so adieu." To whom Saladin, having already taken leave of all his company, thus made answer: "Peradventure, sir, we shall one day give you to see somewhat of our merchandise, and thereby confirm your belief. And so adieu." Thus parted Saladin and his company from Messer Torello, Saladin burning with an exceeding great desire, if life should be continued to him, and the war, which he anticipated, should not undo him, to show Messer Torello no less honour than he had received at his hands, and conversing not a little with his lords, both of Messer Torello himself and of his lady, and all that he did, and that in any wise concerned him, ever more highly commending him. However, having with much diligence spied out all the west, he put to sea, and returned with his company to Alexandria. And having now all needful information, he put himself in a posture of defence. Messer Torello, his mind full of his late guests, returned to Pavia, but, though he long pondered who they might be, he came never at or anywhere near the truth. Then, with great and general mustering of forces, came the time for embarking on the emprise, and Messer Torello, heeding not the tearful entreaties of his wife, resolved to join therein. So, being fully equipped and about to take horse, he said to his lady, whom he most dearly loved, "Wife, for honour's sake, and for the weal of my soul, I go, as thou seest, on this emprise. Our substance and our honour I commend to thy care. Certain I am of my departure, but for the 1,000 accidents that may ensue, certitude I have none of my return. Wherefore I would have thee do me this grace, that whatever be my fate, shouldst thou lack certain intelligence that I live, thou wilt expect me a year and a month and a day from this departure, before you marry again." Whereto the lady, weeping bitterly, made answer: "Messer Torello, I know not how I shall support the distress in which, thus departing, you leave me. But should my life not fail beneath it, and aught befall thee, live and die secure that I shall live and die the wife of Messer Torello and of his memory." Whereupon, "Wife," returned Messer Torello, "well assured I am that, so far as in thee shall lie, this promise of thine will be kept. But thou art young and fair, and of a great family, and thy virtue is rare and generally known. Wherefore I make no doubt that, should there be any suspicion of my death, thou wilt be asked of thy brothers and kinsmen by many a great gentleman, against whose attacks, though thou desire it never so, thou wilt not be able to hold out, but wilt perforce be fain to gratify one or other of them, for which cause it is that I ask thee to wait just so long and no longer." "As I have said," replied the lady, "so, in so far as I may, I shall do, and if I must needs do otherwise, rest assured that of this your behest I shall render you obedience. but I pray God that he bring neither you nor me to such a strait yet awhile. Which said, the lady wept, and having embraced Messer Torello, drew from her finger a ring, and gave it to him, saying, Should it betide that I die before I see you again, mind you of me when you look upon it. Messer Torello took the ring, and got him to horse, and having bidden all adieu, fared forth on his journey. And being arrived with his company at Genoa, he embarked on a galley, and having departed thence, in no long time arrived at Acre, and joined the green Christian host, wherein there by and by broke out an exceeding great and mortal sickness, during which, whether owing to Saladin's strategy or his good fortune, he made an easy capture of well nigh all the remnant of the Christians that were escaped, and quartered them in divers prisons in many cities, of which captives, Messer Torello being one, was brought to Alexandria and there confined, where, not being known, and fearing to make himself known, he, under constraint of necessity, applied him to the training of hawks, whereof he was a very great master. And thereby he fell under the notice of Saladin, who took him out of the prison, and made him his falconer. The Soldan called him by no other name than Christian, and neither recognized nor was recognized by him, who, his whole soul ever in Pavia, essayed many a time to escape, that he might return thither, but still without success. Wherefore certain Genoese, that were come to Alexandria as ambassadors to the Soldan, for the redemption of some of their townsfolk, being about to return, he resolved to write to his lady, how that he lived, and would come back to her, as soon as he might, and that she should expect his return. And having so done, he earnestly besought one of the ambassadors, whom he knew, to see that the letter reached the hands of the abbot of San Pietro in Ciel d'Oro, who was his uncle. Now, such being the posture of Messer Torello's affairs, it befell one day that while he talked with Saladin of his hawks, he smiled, whereby his mouth shaped itself in a fashion of which Saladin had taken particular note while he was at Pavia. And so, recalling Messer Torello to mind, he fixed his gaze upon him, and it seemed to him that 'twas indeed Messer Torello. Wherefore, leaving the matter of which they were conversing, Tell me, Christian, quoth he, of what country art thou in the west? My lord, replied Messer Torello, I am a Lombard, of a city called Pavia, a poor man, and of humble condition. Which when he heard, Saladin, well nigh resolved of his doubt, said joyfully to himself, God has provided me with the occasion meet to prove to this man what store I set by his courtesy. And without another word, he brought him into a room where he kept all his wearing apparel, and said, Look, Christian, if among these robes there be any that thou hast ever seen before. So Messer Torello examined the robes, and espied those which his lady had given to Saladin. But deeming that they could not be the same, he replied, My lord, there is no robe here that I recognize, albeit 'tis true that those robes are such as I once wore myself, in company with 3 merchants that came to my house. Whereupon Saladin could refrain himself no longer, but, tenderly embracing him, You, quoth he, are Messer Torello d'Istria, and I am one of those 3 merchants, to whom your lady gave these robes. And now is the time to warrant you of the quality of my merchandise, as when I parted from you, I told you might come to pass. Which to hear, Messer Torello was at once overjoyed and abashed, overjoyed to have entertained so illustrious a guest, and abashed, for that it seemed to him that he had given him but a sorry entertainment. To whom, Messer Torello, quoth Saladin, since hither God has sent you to me, deem that 'tis no more I that am lord here, but you. And so they made great cheer together, and then Saladin caused Messer Torello to be royally arrayed, and presented him to all his greatest lords, and having extolled his merit in no stinted measure, bade all, as they hoped for grace from him, honour Messer Torello even as himself. And so from that hour did they all, but most especially the two lords that had been with Saladin at Messer Torello's house. The glory to which Messer Torello thus suddenly found himself raised somewhat diverted his mind from the affairs of Lombardy, and the more so for that he entertained no doubt that his letter had reached his uncle's hands. But for that in the camp, or rather army, of the Christians, on the day when they were taken by Saladin, there died and was buried one Messer Torello de Dignes, an obscure knight of Provence, whereas Messer Torello d'Istria was known to all host for a right noble gentleman, who so heard tell that Messer Torello was dead, supposed that was Messer Torello d'Istria, and not Messer Torello de Dignes. Nor did what happened after, to wit, the capture, avail to undeceive them. For not a few Italians had carried the report with them, among whom there were some who made bold to say that they had seen Messer Torello d'Istria's dead body, and had been present at its interment. Which rumour, coming to the ears of his lady and his kinsfolk, great indeed, nay immeasurable, was the distress that it occasioned, not only to them, but to all that had known him. The mode and measure of his lady's grief, her mourning, her lamentation, 'twere tedious to describe. Enough that, after some months spent in almost unmitigated tribulation, her sorrow showed signs of abatement, whereupon, suit being made for her hand by some of the greatest men of Lombardy, her brothers and other kinsfolk began to importune her to marry again. Times not a few, and with floods of tears, she refused. But overborne at last, she consented to do as they would have her, upon the understanding that she was to remain unmarried until the term for which she had bound herself to Messer Torello was fulfilled. Now the lady's affairs being in this posture at Pavia, it befell that some 8 days or so before the time appointed for her marriage, Messer Torello one day espied in Alexandria one that he had observed go with the Genoese ambassadors aboard the galley that took them to Genoa, wherefore he called them, and asked him what sort of a voyage they had had, and when they had reached Genoa. "My lord," replied the other, "the galley made but a sorry voyage of it, as I learned in Crete, where I remained. For that, while she was nearing Sicily, there arose a terrible gale from the north that drove her on to the shoals of Barbary, and never a soul escaped, and among the rest my 2 brothers were lost." Which report believing, and 'twas indeed most true, and calling to mind that in a few days the term that he had asked of his wife would be fulfilled, and surmising that there could be no tidings of him at Pavia, Messer Torello made no question but that the lady was provided with another husband, whereby he sank into such a depth of woe that he lost all power to eat, and betook him to his bed and resigned himself to die. Which when Saladin, by whom he was most dearly beloved, learned, he came to him, and having plied him with many and most instant entreaties, learned at length the cause of his distress and sickness, and having chidden him not a little that he had not sooner apprised him thereof, he besought him to put on a cheerful courage, assuring him that if so he did, he would bring it to pass that he should be in Pavia at the time appointed, and told him how. Believing Saladin's word the more readily that he had many times heard that 'twas possible, and had not seldom been done, Messer Torello recovered heart, and was instant with Saladin that he should make all haste. Accordingly, Saladin bade one of his necromancers, of whose skill he had already had proof, to devise a method whereby Messer Torello should be transported abed in a single night to Pavia. The necromancer made answer that it should be done, but that 'twere best he put Messer Torello to sleep. The matter being thus arranged, Saladin hied him back to Messer Torello, and finding him most earnestly desirous to be in Pavia at the time appointed, if so it might be, and if not, to die. Messer Torello, quoth he, if you dearly love your lady, and misdoubt that she may become the bride of another, nowise, God wot, do I censure you, for that, of all the ladies that ever I saw, she, for bearing, manners, and address, to say naught of beauty, which is but the flower that perishes, seems to me the most worthy to be lauded and cherished. Much had I been gratified, since fortune has sent you hither to me, that, while you and I yet live, we had exercised equal lordship in the governance of this my realm. And if such was not God's will, and this must needs come upon you, that you are fain either to be at Pavia at the time appointed, or to die, I had desired of all things to have been apprised thereof at such a time that I might have sent you home with such honourable circumstance, and state, and escort, as befit your high desert. Which not being vouchsafed me, and as naught will content you but to be there forthwith, I do what I can, and speed you thither on such wise as I have told you. My lord, replied Messer Torello, had you said naught, you have already done enough to prove your good will towards me, and that in so high a degree as is quite beyond my deserts, and most assured of the truth of what you say, shall I live or die, and so had done, had you not said it. But, seeing that my resolve is taken, I pray you that which you promise to do be done speedily, for that after tomorrow I may no longer count on being expected. Saladin assured him that 'twas so ordered that he should not be disappointed. And on the morrow, it being his purpose to speed him on his journey that same night, he caused to be set up in one of his great halls a most goodly and sumptuous bed, composed of mattresses, all, as was their wont, of velvet and cloth of gold, and had it covered with a quilt, adorned at several intervals with enormous pearls and most rare precious stones, insomuch that 'twas in after time accounted a priceless treasure, and furnished with 2 pillows to match it. Which done, he bade array Messer Torello, who was now quite recovered, in a robe after the Saracenic fashion, the richest and goodliest thing of the kind that was ever seen, and wrap about his head, according to their wont, one of their huge turbans. Then, at a late hour, Saladin, attended by certain of his lords, entered the chamber where Messer Torello was, and seating himself beside him, all but wept, as thus he began. Messer Torello, the time is nigh at hand when you and I must part. Wherefore, since I may neither give you my own nor others' company, the journey that you are about to make not permitting it, I am come here, as 'tis fitting, in this chamber, to take my leave of you. Wherefore, before I bid you adieu, I entreat you by that friendship, that love, which is between us, that you forget me not, and that, if it be possible, when you have settled your affairs in Lombardy, you come at least once, before our days are ended, to visit me, that thereby I may both have the delight of seeing you again, and make good that omission which, by reason of your haste, I must needs now make. And that in the meantime it irk thee not to visit me by letter, and to ask of me whatever you shall have in mind to, and be sure that there lives not the man whom I shall content more gladly than you. Messer Torello could not refrain his tears, and so, with words few and broken by his sobs, he answered that 'twas impossible that the Soldan's generous deeds and chivalrous character should ever be forgotten by him, and without fail he would do as he bade him, so soon as occasion should serve him. Whereupon Saladin tenderly embraced and kissed him, and with many a tear bade him adieu, and quitted the chamber. His lords then took leave of Messer Torello, and followed Saladin into the hall, where he had had the bed made ready. 'Twas now late, and the necromancer being intent to hasten Messer Torello's transit, a physician brought him a potion, and having first shown him what he was to give him by way of viaticum, caused him to drink it, and not long after he fell asleep, in which state he was carried by Saladin's command, and laid on the goodly bed, whereon he set a large and fair and most sumptuous crown, marking it in such sort that there could be no mistake that it was sent by Saladin to Messer Torello's wife. He next placed on Messer Torello's finger a ring, in which was set a carbuncle of such brilliance that it showed as a lighted torch, and of well-nigh inestimable value. After which he girded on him a sword, the appointments of which might not readily be appraised, and therewithal he adorned him in front with a pendant, wherein were pearls, the like of which had never been seen, and not a few other rare jewels. And moreover, on either side of him he set 2 vast basins of gold full of pistoles, and strings of pearls not a few, and rings and girdles, and other things, which 'twere tedious to enumerate, he disposed around him. Which done, he kissed Messer Torello again, and bade the necromancer speed him on his journey. Whereupon, forthwith, the bed, with Messer Torello thereon, was borne away from before Saladin's eyes, and he and his barons remained conversing thereof. The bed, as Messer Torello had requested, had already been deposited in the church of San Piero in Ciel d'Oro at Pavia, and Messer Torello, with all the aforesaid jewels and ornaments upon and about him, was lying thereon, and still slept, when, upon the stroke of matins, the sacristan came into the church, light in hand, and presently setting eyes on the sumptuous bed, was not only amazed, but mightily terrified, insomuch that he turned back and took flight. Which the abbot and monks, observing with no small surprise, asked wherefore he fled, and he told them. Whereupon, "Oh," quoth the abbot, "thou art no longer a child, nor yet so new to this church that thou shouldst so lightly be appalled. Go we now, and see who it is that has given thee this childish fright." So, with a blaze of torches, the abbot, attended by his monks, entered the church, and espied this wondrous costly bed whereon the knight slept. And, while, hesitant and fearful, daring not to approach the bed, they scanned the rare and splendid jewels, it befell that, the efficacy of the potion being exhausted, Messer Torello awoke and heaved a great sigh, whereat the monks and the abbot, quaking and crying out, "Lord, help us!" one and all took to flight. Messer Torello, opening his eyes and looking about him, saw, to his no small satisfaction, that without a doubt he was in the very place where he had craved of Saladin to be. So up he sat, and taking particular note of the matters with which he was surrounded, accounted the magnificence of Saladin to exceed even the measure, great though it was, that he already knew. However, he still kept quiet, save that, perceiving the monks in flight, and surmising the reason, he began to call the abbot by name, bidding him be of good courage, for that he was his nephew, Torello. Whereat the abbot did but wax more terrified, for that he deemed Torello had been many a month dead. But after a while, as he heard himself still called, sound judgment got the better of his fears, and making the sign of the cross, he drew nigh Torello, who said to him, "Father, what is it you fear? By God's grace I live, and hither am come back from overseas." Whom, for all he had grown a long beard and was dressed in the Saracenic fashion, the abbot after a while recognized, and now, quite reassured, took by the hand, saying, "Son, welcome home." Then, "No cause hast thou to marvel at our fears," he went on, "seeing that there is never a soul in these parts but firmly believes thee to be dead, insomuch that I may tell thee that Madonna Adalietta, thy wife, overborne by the entreaties and menaces of her kinsfolk, and against her will, is provided with another husband, to whom she is this morning to go, and all is made ready for the nuptials and the attendant festivities." Whereupon, Messer Torello, being risen from the sumptuous bed, did the abbot and the monks wondrous cheer, and besought them, one and all, to tell never a soul of his return, until he had completed something that he had on hand. After which, having put the costly jewels in safe keeping, he recounted to the abbot all the story of his adventures to that very hour. The abbot, rejoicing in his good fortune, joined with him in offering thanks to God. Messer Torello then asked him who might be his wife's new husband, and the abbot told him. Quoth then Messer Torello, "Before my return be known, I purpose to see how my wife will comport herself at the nuptials. Wherefore, though 'tis not the wont of men of religion to go to such gatherings, I had lief that for love of me you arranged for us to go thither together." The abbot answered that he would gladly do so, and as soon as 'twas day, he sent word to the bridegroom that he had thoughts of being present at his nuptials, accompanied by a friend, whereto the gentleman made answer that he was much gratified. So, at the breakfast hour, Messer Torello, dressed as he was, hied him with the abbot to the bridegroom's house, as many as saw them gazing on him with wonder, but none recognizing him, and the abbot giving all to understand that he was a Saracen sent by the Soldan as ambassador to the King of France. Messer Torello was accordingly seated at a table directly opposite that of his lady, whom he eyed with exceeding great delight, the more so that he saw that in her face which showed him that she was chagrined by the nuptials. She in like manner from time to time bent her regard on him. Howbeit, what with his long beard and his foreign garb, and her firm persuasion that he was dead, she had still no sort of recollection of him. However, Messer Torello at length deemed it time to make trial of her, whether she would remember him. Wherefore he took the ring that the lady had given him on his departure, and keeping it close in the palm of his hand, he called to him a page that waited upon her, and said to him, "Tell the bride from me that 'tis the custom in my country that, when a stranger, such as I, eats with a bride, like herself, at her wedding feast, she, in token that he is welcome to her board, sends him the cup from which she herself drinks, full of wine. And when the stranger has drunk his fill, he closes the cup, and the bride drinks what is left therein." The page carried the message to the lady, who, being of good understanding and manners, and supposing him to be some very great man, by way of showing that she was gratified by his presence, commanded that a gilt cup that was on the table before her should be rinsed and filled with wine, and borne to the gentleman. Which being done, Messer Torello, having privily conveyed her ring into his mouth, let it fall, while he drank, into the cup, on such wise that none wist thereof, and leaving but a little wine at the bottom, closed the cup and returned it to the lady, who, having taken it, that she might do full honour to the custom of her guest's country, lifted the lid, and set the cup to her mouth, whereby, espying the ring, she thereon mutely gazed a while, and recognizing it for that which she had given Messer Torello on his departure, she steadfastly regarded the supposed stranger, whom now she also recognized. Whereupon, well nigh distracted, oversetting the table in front of her, she exclaimed, "'Tis my lord! 'Tis verily Messer Torello!" And rushing to the table at which she sat, giving never a thought to her apparel, or aught that was on the table, she flung herself upon it, and reaching forward as far as she could, she threw her arms about him and hugged him. Nor, for aught that any said or did, could she be induced to release his neck, until Messer Torello himself bade her forbear a while, for that she would have time enough to kiss him thereafter. The lady then stood up, and for a while all was disorder, albeit the feast was yet more gladsome than before, by reason of the recovery of so honourable a knight. Then, at Messer Torello's entreaty, all were silent, while he recounted to them the story of his adventures from the day of his departure to that hour, concluding by saying that the gentleman who, deeming him to be dead, had taken his lady to wife, ought not to be affronted, if he, being alive, reclaimed her. The bridegroom, albeit he was somewhat crestfallen, made answer in frank and friendly sort that 'twas for Messer Torello to do what he liked with his own. The lady resigned the ring and the crown that her new spouse had given her, and put on the ring she had taken from the cup, and likewise the crown sent her by the Soldan. And so forth they hied them, and with full nuptial pomp wended their way to Messer Torello's house, and there for a great while they made merry with his late disconsolate friends and kinsfolk, and all the citizens, who accounted his restoration as little short of a miracle. Messer Torello, having bestowed part of his rare jewels upon him who had borne the cost of the wedding feast, and part on the abbot, and many other folk, and having by more than one messenger sent word of his safe homecoming and prosperous estate to Saladin, acknowledging himself ever his friend and vassal, lived many years thereafter with his worthy lady, acquitting himself yet more courteously than of yore. Such, then, was the end of the troubles of Messer Torello and his dear lady, and such the reward of their cheerful and ready courtesies. Now some there are that strive to do offices of courtesy, and have the means, but do them with so ill a grace, that, ere they are done, they have in effect sold them at a price above their worth. Wherefore, if no reward ensue to them thereof, neither they nor other folk have cause to marvel. End of Day 10, the 9th story.
Day 10, the 10th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Decameron, by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. RIGG. Day 10, the 10th story. The Marquis of Saluzzo, overborne by the entreaties of his vassals, consents to take a wife, but being minded to please himself in the choice of her, takes a husbandman's daughter. He has 2 children by her, both of whom he makes her believe that he has put to death. Afterward, feigning to be tired of her, and to have taken another wife, he turns her out of doors in her shift, and brings his daughter into the house in guise of his bride. But, finding her patient under it all, he brings her home again, and shows her her children now grown up, and honours her, and causes her to be honoured as Marchioness.
Ended the king's long story, with which all seemed to be very well pleased. Quoth Diodio with a laugh, "The good man that looked that night to cause the boogie's tail to droop would scarce have contributed 2 pennyworths of all the praise you bestow on Messer Torello." Then, witting that it now only remained for him to tell, thus he began.
Gentle my ladies, this day, meseems, is dedicate to kings and soldans and folk of like quality. Wherefore, that I stray not too far from you, I am minded to tell you somewhat of a marquis, certes naught magnificent, but a piece of mad folly, albeit there came good thereof to him in the end, the which I counsel none to copy, for that great pity 'twas that it turned out well with him. There was in olden days a certain Marquis of Saluzzo, Gualtieri by name, a young man, but head of the house, who, having neither wife nor child, passed his time in naught else but hawking and hunting, and of taking a wife and begetting children had no thought, wherein he should have been accounted very wise. But his vassals, brooking it ill, did oftentimes entreat him to take a wife, that he might not die without an heir, and they be left without a lord, offering to find him one of such a pattern and of such parentage that he might marry with good hope, and be well content with the sequel. To whom, "My friends," replied Gualtieri, "you enforce me to that which I had resolved never to do, seeing how hard it is to find a wife whose ways accord well with one's own, and how plentiful is the supply of such as run counter thereto, and how grievous a life he leads who chances upon a lady that matches ill with him. And to say that you think to know the daughters by the qualities of their fathers and mothers, and thereby, so you would argue, to provide me with a wife to my liking, is but folly. For I wot not how you may penetrate the secrets of their mothers, so as to know their fathers. And granted that you do know them, daughters oftentimes resemble neither of their parents. However, as you are minded to rivet these fetters upon me, I am content that so it be, and that I may have no cause to reproach any but myself, should it turn out ill. I am resolved that my wife shall be of my own choosing. But of this rest assured, that no matter whom I choose, if she receive not from you the honour due to a lady, you shall prove to your great cost how sorely I resent being thus constrained by your importunity to take a wife against my will. The worthy men replied that they were well content, so only he would marry without more ado, and Gualtieri, who had long noted with approval the mien of a poor girl that dwelt on a farm hard by his house, and found her fair enough, deemed that with her he might pass a tolerably happy life. Wherefore he sought no further, but forthwith resolved to marry her, and having sent for her father, who was a very poor man, he contracted with him to take her to wife. Which done, Gualtieri assembled all the friends he had in those parts, and "My friends," quoth he, "you were and are minded that I should take a wife, and rather to comply with your wishes than for any desire that I had to marry, I have made up my mind to do so. You remember the promise you gave me, to wit, that whomsoever I should take, you would pay her the duty due to a lady, which promise I now require you to keep, the time being come when I am to keep mine. I have found hard by here a maiden after mine own heart, whom I propose to take to wife, and to bring hither to my house in the course of a few days. Wherefore bethink you how you may make the nuptial feast splendid, and welcome her with all honour, that I may confess myself satisfied with your observance of your promise, as you will be with my observance of mine." The worthy men, one and all, answered with alacrity that they were well content, and that whoever she might be, they would entreat her as a lady, and pay her all due honour as such. After which they all addressed them to make goodly and grand and gladsome celebration of the event, as did also Gualtieri. He arranged for a wedding most stately and fair, and bade thereto a goodly number of his friends and kinsfolk, and great gentlemen, and others of the neighbourhood. And therewithal he caused many a fine and costly robe to be cut and fashioned to the figure of a girl who seemed to him of the like proportions as the girl that he proposed to wed, and laid in store besides of girdles and rings, with a costly and beautiful crown, and all the other paraphernalia of a bride. The day that he had appointed for the wedding being come, about half tierce he got him to horse with as many as had come to do him honour, and having made all needful dispositions, "Gentlemen," quoth he, "'tis time to go bring home the bride." And so away he rode with his company to the village, where, being come to the house of the girl's father, they found her returning from the spring with a bucket of water, making all the haste that she could, so she might afterwards go with the other women to see Gualtieri's bride come by, whom Gualtieri no sooner saw than he called her by her name, to wit, Griselda, and asked her where her father was. To whom she modestly made answer, "My lord, he is in the house." Whereupon Gualtieri dismounted, and having bidden the rest await him without, entered the cottage alone, and meeting her father, whose name was Giannucolo, "I am come," quoth he, "to wed Griselda. But first of all there are some matters I would learn from her own lips in thy presence." He then asked her whether, if he took her to wife, she would study to comply with his wishes, and be not wroth, no matter what he might say or do, and be obedient, with not a few other questions of a like sort, to all of which she answered aye. Whereupon Gualtieri took her by the hand, led her forth, and before the eyes of all his company, and of as many other folk as were there, caused her to strip naked, and let bring the garments that he had fashioned for her, and had her forthwith arrayed therein, and upon her unkempt head let set a crown. And then, while all wondered, "Gentlemen," quoth he, This is she whom I purpose to make my wife, so she be minded to have me for husband. Then she, standing abashed and astonished, he turned to her, saying, Griselda, wilt thou have me for thy husband? To whom, Ay, my lord, answered she. And I will have thee to wife, said he, and married her before them all, and having set her upon a palfrey, he brought her home with pomp. The wedding was fair and stately, and had he married a daughter of the King of France, the feast could not have been more splendid. It seemed as if, with the change of her garb, the bride had acquired a new dignity of mind and mien. She was, as we have said, fair of form and feature, and therewithal she was now grown so engaging and gracious and debonair, that she showed no longer as the shepherdess and the daughter of Giannucolo, but as the daughter of some noble lord, insomuch that she caused as many as had known her before to marvel. Moreover, she was so obedient and devoted to her husband that he deemed himself the happiest and luckiest man in the world. And likewise so gracious and kindly was she to her husband's vassals, that there was none of them but loved her more dearly than himself, and was zealous to do her honour, and prayed for her welfare and prosperity and aggrandisement. And instead of, as erstwhile, saying that Gualtieri had done foolishly to take her to wife, now averred that he had not his like in the world for wisdom and discernment, for that, save to him, her noble qualities would ever have remained hidden under her sorry apparel and the garb of the peasant girl. And, in short, she so comported herself as in no long time to bring it to pass that, not only in the marquisate, but far and wide besides, her virtues and her admirable conversation were matter of common talk, and if aught had been said to the disadvantage of her husband when he married her, the judgment was now altogether to the contrary effect. She had not been long with Gualtieri before she conceived, and in a due time she was delivered of a girl, whereat Gualtieri made great cheer. But soon after a strange humour took possession of him, to wit, to put her patience to the proof by prolonged and intolerable hard usage. Wherefore he began by afflicting her with his gibes, putting on a vexed air, and telling her that his vassals were most sorely dissatisfied with her by reason of her base condition, and all the more so since they saw that she was a mother, and that they did naught but most ruefully murmur at the birth of a daughter. Whereto Griselda, without the least change of countenance or sign of discomposure, made answer, My lord, do with me as thou mayst deem best for thine own honour and comfort, for well I wot that I am of less account than they, and unworthy of this honourable estate to which of thy courtesy thou hast advanced me. By which answer Gualtieri was well pleased, witting that she was in no degree puffed up with pride by his or any other's honourable entreatment of her. A while afterwards, having in general terms given his wife to understand that the vassals could not endure her daughter, he sent her a message by a servant. So the servant came, and "Madam," quoth he, with a most dolorous mien, "so I value my life, I must needs do my lord's bidding. He has bidden me take your daughter, and—" He said no more, but the lady, by what she heard, and read in his face, and remembered of her husband's words, understood that he was bidden to put the child to death. Whereupon she presently took the child from the cradle, and having kissed and blessed her, albeit she was very sore at heart, she changed not countenance, but placed it in the servant's arms, saying, See that thou leave naught undone that my lord and thine has charged thee to do, but leave her not so that the beasts and the birds devour her, unless he have so bidden thee. So the servant took the child, and told Gualtieri what the lady had said. And Gualtieri, marvelling at her constancy, sent him with the child to Bologna, to one of his kinswomen, whom he besought to rear and educate the child with all care, but never to let it be known whose child she was. Soon after, it befell that the lady again conceived, and in due time was delivered of a son, whereat Gualtieri was overjoyed. But, not content with what he had done, he now even more poignantly afflicted the lady, and one day, with a ruffled mien, "Wife," quoth he, "since thou gavest birth to this boy, I may on no wise live in peace with my vassals, so bitterly do they reproach me that a grandson of Giannucolo is to succeed me as their lord. And therefore I fear that, so I be not minded to be sent a packing hence, I must even do herein as I did before, and in the end put thee away, and take another wife. The lady heard him patiently, and answered only, My lord, study how thou mayest content thee and best please thyself, and waste no thought upon me, for there is naught I desire, save in so far as I know that 'tis thy pleasure. Not many days after, Gualtieri, in like manner as he had sent for the daughter, sent for the son, and having made a show of putting him to death, provided for his, as for the girl's, nurture at Bologna. Whereat the lady showed no more discomposure, or countenance, or speech, than at the loss of her daughter, which Gualtieri found passing strange, and inly affirmed that there was never another woman in the world that would have so done. And but that he had marked that she was most tenderly affectionate towards her children, whilst 'twas well pleasing to him, he had supposed that she was tired of them, whereas he knew that 'twas of her discretion that she so did. His vassals, who believed that he had put the children to death, held him mightily to blame for his cruelty, and felt the utmost compassion for the lady. She, however, said never aught to the ladies that condoled with her on the death of her children, but that the pleasure of him that had begotten them was her pleasure likewise. Years not a few had passed since the girl's birth, when Gualtieri at length deemed the time come to put his wife's patience to the final proof. Accordingly, in the presence of a great company of his vassals, he declared that on no wise might he longer brook to have Griselda to wife, that he confessed that in taking her he had done a sorry thing and the act of a stripling, and that he therefore meant to do what he could to procure the Pope's dispensation to put Griselda away and take another wife, for which cause, being much upbraided by many worthy men, he made no other answer, but only that needs must it so be. Whereof the lady being apprised, and now deeming that she must look to go back to her father's house, and perchance tend the sheep as she had aforetime, and to see him, to whom she was utterly devoted, engrossed by another woman, did inly bewail herself right sorely, but still, with the same composed mien with which she had borne fortune's former buffets, she set herself to endure this last outrage. Nor was it long before Gualtieri, by counterfeit letters which he caused to be sent to him from Rome, made his vassals believe that the Pope had thereby given him a dispensation to put Griselda away and take another wife. Wherefore, having caused her to be brought before him, he said to her, in the presence of not a few, Wife, by licence granted me by the Pope, I am now free to put thee away and take another wife. And for that my forebears have always been great gentlemen and lords of these parts, whereas thine have ever been husbandmen, I purpose that thou go back to Gianucolo's house with the dowry that thou broughtest me, whereupon I shall bring home a lady that I have found, and who is meet to be my wife. 'Twas not without travail most grievous that the lady, as she heard this announcement, got the better of her woman's nature, and suppressing her tears, made answer, My lord, I ever knew that my low degree was on no wise congruous with your nobility, and acknowledged that the rank I had with you was of your and God's bestowal, nor did I ever make as if it were mine by gift, or so esteem it, but still accounted it as a loan. 'Tis your pleasure to recall it, and therefore it should be, and is, my pleasure to render it up to you. So here is your ring with which you espoused me. Take it back. You bid me take with me the dowry that I brought you, which to do will require neither paymaster on your part, nor purse nor pack horse on mine, for I am not unmindful that naked was I when you first had me. And if you deem it seemly that that body in which I have borne children, by you begotten, be beheld of all, naked will I depart. But yet I pray you, be pleased, in guerdon of the virginity that I brought you and take not away, to suffer me to bear hence upon my back a single shift. I crave no more, besides my dowry. There was naught of which Gualtieri was so fain as to weep, but yet, setting his face as flint, he made answer, I allow thee a shift to thy back, so get thee hence. All that stood by besought him to give her a robe, that she, who had been his wife for 13 years and more, might not be seen to quit his house in so sorry and shameful a plight, having naught on her but a shift. But their entreaties went for nothing. The lady in her shift, and barefoot and bareheaded, having bade them adieu, departed the house, and went back to her father amid the tears and lamentations of all that saw her. Giannucolo, who had ever deemed it a thing incredible that Gualtieri should keep his daughter to wife, and had looked for this to happen every day, and had kept the clothes that she put off on the morning that Gualtieri had wedded her, now brought them to her, and she, having resumed them, applied herself to the petty drudgery of her father's house, as she had been wont, enduring with fortitude this cruel visitation of adverse fortune. Now, no sooner had Gualtieri dismissed Griselda than he gave his vassals to understand that he had taken to wife a daughter of one of the counts of Panago. He accordingly made great preparation as for the nuptials, during which he sent for Griselda, to whom being come, quoth he, I am bringing hither my new bride, and in this her first homecoming I purpose to show her honour, and thou knowest that women I have none in the house that know how to set chambers in due order, or attend to the many other matters that so joyful an event requires. Wherefore do thou, that understandest these things better than another, see to all that needs to be done, and bid hither such ladies as thou mayest see fit, and receive them as if thou wert the lady of the house. And then, when the nuptials are ended, thou mayst go back to thy cottage. Albeit each of these words pierced Griselda's heart like a knife, for that in resigning her good fortune she had not been able to renounce the love she bore Gualtieri. Nevertheless, my lord, she made answer, I am ready and prompt to do your pleasure. And so, clad in her sorry garments of coarse romagnole, she entered the house, which but a little before she had quitted in her shift, and addressed her to sweep the chambers, and arrange arras and cushions in the halls, and make ready the kitchen, and set her hand to everything, as if she had been a paltry serving wench. Nor did she rest until she had brought all into such meet and seemly trim as the occasion demanded. This done, she invited, in Gualtieri's name, all the ladies of those parts to be present at his nuptials, and awaited the event. The day being come, still wearing her sorry weeds, but in heart and soul and mien the lady, she received the ladies as they came, and gave each a gladsome greeting. Now Gualtieri, as we said, had caused his children to be carefully nurtured and brought up by a kinswoman of his at Bologna, which kinswoman was married into the family of the Counts of Panago, and the girl being now 12 years old, and the loveliest creature that ever was seen, and the boy being about 6 years old, he had sent word to his kinswoman's husband at Bologna, praying him to be pleased to come with this girl and boy of his to Saluzzo, and to see that he brought a goodly and honourable company with him, and to give all to understand that he brought the girl to him to wife, and on no wise to disclose to any who she really was. The gentleman did as the Marquis bade him, and within a few days of his setting forth arrived at Saluzzo about breakfast time with the girl and her brother and a noble company, and found all the folk of those parts, and much people besides, gathered there in expectation of Gualtieri's new bride, who, being received by the ladies, was no sooner come into the hall where the tables were set than Griselda advanced to meet her, saying with hearty cheer, "Welcome, my lady." So the ladies, who had with much instance, but in vain, besought Gualtieri either to let Griselda keep in another room, or at any rate to furnish her with one of the robes that had been hers, that she might not present herself in such a sorry guise before the strangers, sat down to table, and the service being begun, the eyes of all were set on the girl, and every one said that Gualtieri had made a good exchange, and Griselda joined with the rest in greatly commending her, and also her little brother. And now Gualtieri, sated at last with all that he had seen of his wife's patience, marking that this new and strange turn made not the least alteration in her demeanour, and being well assured that 'twas not due to apathy, for he knew her to be of excellent understanding, deemed it time to relieve her of the suffering which he judged her to dissemble under a resolute front. And so, having called her to him in presence of them all, he said with a smile, "And what thinkest thou of our bride?" "My lord," replied Griselda, "I think mighty well of her, and if she be but as discreet as she is fair, and so I deem her, I make no doubt but you may reckon to lead with her a life of incomparable felicity. But with all earnestness I entreat you that you spare her those tribulations which you did once inflict upon another that was yours, for I scarce think that she would be able to bear them, as well because she is younger, as for that she has been delicately nurtured, whereas that other had known no respite of hardship since she was but a little child. Marking that she made no doubt but that the girl was to be his wife, and yet spoke never a whit the less sweetly, Gualtieri caused her to sit down beside him, and "Griselda," said he, "'tis now time that thou see the reward of thy long patience, and that those who have deemed me cruel and unjust and insensate should know that what I did was done of purpose aforethought, for that I was minded to give both thee and them a lesson, that thou mightst learn to be a wife, and they in like manner might learn how to take and keep a wife, and that I might beget me perpetual peace with thee for the rest of my life. Whereof, being in great fear when I came to take a wife, lest I should be disappointed, I therefore, to put the matter to the proof, did, and how sorely thou knowest, harass and afflict thee. And since I never knew thee either by deed or by word to deviate from my will, I now, deeming myself to have of thee that assurance of happiness which I desired, am minded to restore to thee at once all that, step by step, I took from thee, and by extremity of joy to compensate the tribulations that I inflicted on thee. Receive then this girl, whom thou supposest to be my bride, and her brother, with glad heart, as thy children and mine. These are they, whom by thee and many another it has long been supposed that I did ruthlessly to death. And I am thy husband that loves thee more dearly than aught else, deeming that other there is none that has the like good cause to be well content with his wife. Which said, he embraced and kissed her, and then, while she wept for joy, they rose and hied them there where sat the daughter, all astonished to hear the news, whom, as also her brother, they tenderly embraced, and explained to them, and many others that stood by, the whole mystery. Whereat the ladies, transported with delight, rose from table, and betook them with Griselda to a chamber, and with better omen divested her of her sorry garb, and arrayed her in one of her own robes of state. And so, in guise of a lady, howbeit in her rags she had showed as no less, they led her back into the hall. Wondrous was the cheer which there they made with the children, and all overjoyed at the event they revelled and made merry amain, and prolonged the festivities for several days. And very discreet they pronounced Gualtieri, albeit they censured as intolerably harsh the probation to which he had subjected Griselda, and most discreet beyond all compare they accounted Griselda. Some days after, the Count of Panago returned to Bologna, and Gualtieri took Giannucolo from his husbandry, and established him in honour as his father-in-law, wherein to his great solace he lived for the rest of his days. Gualtieri himself, having mated his daughter with a husband of high degree, lived long and happily thereafter with Griselda, to whom he ever paid all honour. Now what shall we say in this case, but that even into the cots of the poor the heavens let fall at times spirits divine, as into the palaces of kings souls that are fitted to tend hogs than to exercise lordship over men? Who but Griselda had been able, with a countenance not only tearless but cheerful, to endure the hard and unheard of trials to which Gualtieri subjected her? Who, perhaps, might have deemed himself to have made no bad investment, had he chanced upon one, who, having been turned out of his house in her shift, had found means so to dust the pelisse of another as to get herself thereby a fine robe. End of Day 10, the 10th story.
Day 10. The conclusion of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by H.M. RIGG. Day the 10th. The conclusion. So ended Dioneo's story, whereof the ladies, diversely inclining, one to censure where another found matter of commendation, had discoursed not a little, when the king, having glanced at the sky, and marked that the sun was now low, and so much that it was nigh the vesper hour, still keeping his seat, thus began: Excuse it, my ladies, as methinks you wot 'tis not only in minding them of the past and apprehending the present that the wit of mortals consists, but by one means or the other to be able to foresee the future is by the sakes accounted the height of wisdom. Now tomorrow, as you know, it will be 15 days since, in quest of recreation and for the conservation of our health and life, we, shunning the dismal and dolorous and afflicting spectacles that have ceased not in our city since this season of pestilence began, took our departure from Florence, wherein, to my thinking, we have done naught that was not seemly, for, if I have duly used my powers of observation, albeit some gay stories, and of a kind to stimulate concupiscence, have here been told, and we have daily known no lack of dainty dishes and good wine, nor yet of music and song, things one and all apt to incite weak minds to that which is not seemly. Neither on your part nor on ours have I marked deed or word, or aught of any kind that called for reprehension, but by what I have seen and heard, seemliness and the sweet intimacy of brothers and sisters have ever reigned among us, which assuredly for the honour and advantage which you and I have had thereof is most grateful to me. Wherefore, lest too long continuance in this way of life might beget some occasion of weariness, and that no man may be able to misconstrue our too long abidance here, and as we have all of us had our day's share of the honour which still remains in me, I should deem it meet, so you be of like mind, that we now go back whence we came, and that the rather that our company, the brood whereof has already reached divers others that are in our neighbourhood, might be so increased that all our pleasure would be destroyed. And so, if my counsel meet with your approval, I will keep the crown I have received of you until our departure, which I propose shall be tomorrow morning. Should you decide otherwise, I have already determined whom to crown for the ensuing day. Much debate ensued among the ladies and young men, but in the end they approved the king's proposal as expedient and seemly, and resolved to do even as he had said. The king therefore summoned the seneschal, and having conferred with him of the order he was to observe on the morrow, he dismissed the company until supper time. So the king being risen, the ladies and the rest likewise rose, and betook them, as they were wont, to their several diversions. Supper time being come, they supped with exceeding great delight, which done, they addressed them to song and music and dancing, and while Lauretta was leading a dance, the king bade Fiammetta give them a song, whereupon Fiammetta right debonairly sang on this wise:
So came but love, and brought no jealousy, so blithe I wot as I. Dame were there none, be she whoe'er she be. If youth's fresh lusty pride, may lady of her lover well content, or valour's just renown, hardihood, prowess tried, wit noble mien, discourse most excellent, and of all grace the crown, that she I am who fain for love to swoon, there where my hope doth lie, these several virtues all conjoined do see. But for that I less wise than meaner wit do other dames discern, Trembling with sore dismay, I still the worst surmise, deeming their hearts with the same flame to burn that of mine maketh prey. Wherefore of him that is my hope's one stay, disconsolate I sigh, yea, mightily and daily do me dree. If but my Lord as true, as worthy to be loved I might approve, I were not jealous then, but for that charmer new doth all too often gallant lure to love, forsworn I hold all men, and sick at heart I am of death full fain, nor lady doth him eye, but I do quake lest she him wrest from me. For God then let each she list to my prayer, nor err in my despite such grievous wrong as say, for should there any be that by or speech or means allurements light of him to rob me may, study or plot I witting shall find way, my beauty it abide, to cause her soul lament such frenesy.
As soon as Fiammetta had ended her song, Dioneo, who was beside her, said with a laugh, "Madam, it would be a great courtesy on your part to do all ladies to wit who he is, that he be not stolen from you in ignorance, seeing that you threaten such dire resentment." Several other songs followed, and it being then nigh upon midnight, all, as the king was pleased to order, betook them to rest. With the first light of the new day they rose, and the seneschal having already conveyed thence all their chattels, they following the lead of their discreet king, hied them back to the Florence, and in Santa Maria Novella, whence they had set forth, the three young men took leave of the seven ladies, and departed to find other diversions elsewhere, while the ladies in due time repaired to their homes. End of conclusion of Day 10. The Author's Epilogue of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by H. M. RIGG. The Author's Epilogue. Most noble damsels, for whose solace I addressed me to this long and toilsome task, meseems that, aided by the divine grace, the bestowal whereof I impute to the efficacy of your pious prayers, and in no wise to merits of mine, I have now brought this work to the full and perfect consummation, which in the outset thereof I promised you. Wherefore it but remains for me to render, first to God and then to you, my thanks, and so to give a rest to my pen and weary hand. But this I purpose not to allow them, until briefly as to questions tacitly mooted, for well assured I am that these stories have no especial privilege above any others. Nay, I forget not that at the beginning of the fourth day I have made the same plain. I shall have answered certain trifling objections, that one of you may be, or some other might advance. Peradventure, then, some of you will be found to say that I have used excessive license in the writing on these stories, in that I have caused ladies at times to tell, and oftentimes to list, matters that, whether to tell or to list, do not well beseem virtuous women. The which I deny, for that there is none of these stories so unseemly, but that it may without offence be told by any one, if but seemly words be used, which rule methinks has here been very well observed. But assume we that is even so, for with you I am not minded to engage in argument, witting that you would vanquish me. Then I say that, for answer why I have so done, reasons many come very readily to hand. In the first place, if aught of the kind in any of these stories there be, it was but such as was demanded by the character of the stories, which let but any person of sound judgment scan with the eye of reason, and it will be abundantly manifest that, unless I had been minded to deform them, they could not have been otherwise recounted. And if perchance they do after all contain here and there a trifling indiscretion of speech, such as might ill sort with one of your precious prudes, who weigh words rather than deeds, and are more concerned to appear than to be good, I say that sort of right was as permissible to me as 'tis to men and women at large in their converse to make use of such terms as hole and pin and mortar, and pestle and sausage and polony, and plenty more besides of a like sort. And therewithal privilege no less should be allowed to my pen than to the pencil of the painter, who without incurring any, or at least any just censure, not only will depict Saint Michael smiting the serpent, or Saint George the dragon, with sword or lance in his discretion, but male he paints as Christ, and female Eve, and his feet that for the salvation of our race willed to die upon the cross, he fastened thereto, now with one and now with 2 nails. Moreover, 'tis patent to all that it was not in the church, of matters whereto pertaining, 'tis meet we speak with all purity of heart and seemliness of phrase, albeit among her histories there are to be found not a few that will ill compare with my writings, nor yet in the schools of the philosophers, where as much as anywhere seemliness is demanded, nor in any place where clergy or philosophers congregate, but in gardens, in pleasaunces, and among folk young indeed, but not so young as to be seducible by stories, and at a time when, if so one might say of one's life, the most sedate might without disgrace walk abroad with his breeches for headgear, that these stories well told. Which stories, such as they are, may, like all things else, be baneful or profitable according to the quality of the hearer. Who knows not that wine is, as Cingiglione or Scolaio and many other aver, an excellent thing for the living creature, and yet noxious to the fevered patient? Are we, for the mischief it does to the fever-stricken, to say that it is a bad thing? Who knows not that fire is most serviceable, nay, necessary to mortals? Are we to say that, because it burns houses and villages and cities, it is a bad thing? Arms, in like manner, are the safeguard of those that desire to live in peace, and also by them are men not seldom maliciously slain, albeit the malice is not in them, but in those that use them for a malicious purpose. Corrupt mind did never yet understand any word in a wholesome sense, and as such a mind has no profit of seemly words, so such as are scarce seemly may as little avail to contaminate a healthy mind as mud the radiance of the sun, or the deformities of earth the splendours of the heavens. What books, what words, what letters are more sacred, more excellent, more venerable than those of Holy Writ? And yet there have been not a few that, perversely constructing them, have brought themselves and others to perdition. Everything is in itself good for somewhat, and being put to a bad purpose may work manifold mischief. And so I say it is with my stories. If any man shall be minded to draw from them matters of evil tendency or consequence, they will not gainsay him, if perchance such matters there be in them, nor will such matters fail to be found in them, if they be wrested and distorted. Nor if any shall seek profit and reward in them, will they deny him the same, and censured or accounted as less than profitable and seemly they can never be, if the times or the persons when and by whom they are read be such as when they were accounted. If any lady must needs say paternosters, or make cakes or tarts for her holy father, let her leave them alone, there is none after whom they will run a begging to be read. Howbeit there are little matters that even the beguines tell, ay, and do now and again. In like manner there will be some who will say that there are stories here which it were better far had been omitted. Granted, but it was neither in my power nor did it behove me to write any but such stories as were narrated, wherefore it was for those by whom they were told to have a care that they were proper, in which case they would have been no less, though as I wrote them. But assuming that I not only wrote but invented the stories, as I did not, I say that I should take no shame to myself that they were not all proper, seeing that artists there is none to be found save God, that does all things well and perfectly. And Charlemagne, albeit he created the paladins, wist not how to make them in such numbers as to form an army of them alone. It must needs be that in the multitude of things there be found diversities of quality. No field was ever so well tilled, but that here and there nettle or thistle or brier would be found in it amid the goodlier growth. Whereto I may add that, having to address me to young and unlearned ladies, as you for the most part are, I should have done foolishly had I gone about searching and swinking to find matters very exquisite, and been sedulous to speak with great precision. However, whoso goes a reading among these stories, let him pass over those that vex him, and read those that please him. That none may be misled, each bears on its brow the epitome of that which it hides within its bosom. Again, I doubt not there will be such as will say that some of the stories are too long, to whom once more I answer, that whoso has aught else to do would be foolish to read them, albeit they were short. And though now that I approach the end of my labours, it is long since I began to write, I am not therefore oblivious that it was to none but leisured ladies that I made proffer of my pains, nor can aught be long to him that reads but to pass the time, so only he thereby accomplish his purpose. Succinctness were rather to be desired by students, who are at pains not merely to pass, but usefully to employ their time, than by you, who have as much time at your disposal as you spend not in amorous delights. Besides which, as none of you goes either to Athens or to Bologna or to Paris to study, it is meet that what is meant for you should be more diffuse than what is to be read by those whose minds have been refined by scholarly pursuits. Nor make I any doubt that there are yet others who will say that the said stories are too full of jests and merry consents, and that it all beseems a man of weight and gravity to have written on such wise. To these I am bound to render, and do render my thanks, for that, prompted by well-meant zeal, they have so tender a regard to my reputation. But to that which they urge against me, I reply after this sort: that I am of weight or I acknowledge, having been often weighed in my time. Wherefore, in answer to the fair that have not weighed me, I affirm that I am not of gravity. On the contrary, I am so light that I float on the surface of the water, and considering that the sermons which the friars make, when they could chide folk for their sins, are today, for the most part, full of jests and merry conceits and drolleries, I deemed that the like stuff would not ill beseem my stories, written as they were, to banish women's dumps. However, if thereby they should laugh too much, they may be readily cured thereof by the lament of Jeremiah, the Passion of the Saviour, or the Complaint of the Magdalene. And who shall question but that yet others there are who will say that I have an evil tongue and venomous, because here and there I tell the truth about the friars? Now for them that so say there is forgiveness, for that is not to be believed but that they have just cause, seeing that the friars are good folk, and eschew hardship for the love of God, and grind intermittently and never blab, and were they not all a trifle malodorous, intercourse with them would be much more agreeable. Nevertheless, I acknowledge that the things of this world have no stability, but are ever undergoing change, and this may have befallen my tongue, no great while ago, one of my fair neighbours. For in what pertains to myself, I trust not my own judgment, but forego it to the best of my power, told me it was the goodliest and sweetest tongue in the world, and in sooth, when this occurred, few of the said stories were yet to write. Nor for that those who so tax me do it despitefully, am I minded to vouchsafe them any further answer. So then, be every lady at liberty to say and believe whatever she may think fit, but 'tis now time for me to bring these remarks to a close, with humble thanks to Him, by whose help and guidance I, after so long travail, have been brought to the desired goal. And may you, sweet my ladies, rest ever in His grace and peace, and be not unmindful of me, if peradventure any of you may, in any measure, have been profited by reading these stories. End of the author's Epilogue. And this is also the end of Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Recorded at LibriVox.org. Thank you for listening.